The fearful avoidant attachment style is one of the most misunderstood attachment styles. And behind the push-pull, the mixed signals, and even all of the different self-sabotaging behaviors is actually a childhood full of inner pain, hidden pain that most people don't even realize is there. And so today we are going to uncover exactly what that hidden pain is actually made up of, what types of wounds exist, and how to start healing them. I want to let you know that today's video is going to be an entirely new approach than most things I've discussed on here recently, because we are going to dive into some really powerful exercises. We're going to dive into a whole bunch of different schools of thought, and I haven't been this excited to share a video with you in so long. In fact, I'll even share a little bit about how some of these key principles and themes that you'll learn today have had probably the single biggest influence on my own healing journey, in hopes that by sharing some of these things with you, they have a profound impact on your own healing journey the way that they've had on mine. So we're going to talk a little bit first about the childhood wounds that shape the fearful avoidant attachment style and some of the types of just background experiences that could have caused you to be a fearful avoidant in the first place. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the neuroscience of how conditioning wires those wounds into your subconscious mind and how your nervous system is constantly responding to your conditioning. And then we'll talk about some ancient wisdom that clearly depicts that until you see your conditioning clearly, it will continuously run your life. I personally feel that if you don't understand this, it is way too easy to get completely trapped in a cycle of reactivity, struggling with trust, fearing abandonment, resisting closeness when things get real, and just never really feeling safe in love. And at the end of this video, I'm going to take you through a really powerful exercise that will transform your approach to healing in a very short period of time. And hopefully it will be an exercise you can carry with you for the rest of your life to recondition your own inner wounds if anything is ever showing up for you or affecting you in negative ways. As I mentioned, this was something that I used in my own healing process that was probably, out of anything I ever personally did, the single most life-changing practice. But in order to get to the exercise, you have to really understand all of the powerful background context I'm going to share with you in this video first. Let's start by talking about this from a high level. Fearful avoidant attachment styles in childhood, they experience a tremendous amount of chaos. And unfortunately, what this does is it wreaks havoc on their own subconscious mind, their programming, and really their nervous system. Most fearful avoidants grew up in an environment where there was constantly broken trust, whether it was through unpredictable caregivers, inconsistency, or betrayal. And what this causes is a fearful avoidant to grow up thinking, I cannot safely rely on others. In fact, the idea of constantly relying on other people might be something that makes you just feel really deeply afraid or even panicked in your body when you think about it. And some obvious high-level ways in which this might exist is if you grew up with a parent who had an alcohol issue or was in active addiction. And it's like one day that person is maybe drinking and they're in a good mood, another day they're drinking and they're cruel and mean, another day they're sobering up and they're trying to be nice, and it's like you never know what you're going to get. Now, of course, that is not the only context that can create fearful avoidant conditioning. It can also be the result of growing up in an environment with a parent who had narcissistic personality disorder, or where there was tremendous fighting or a really ugly, painful divorce, or just chaos in your home on an ongoing basis for any number of reasons. But as a result, you would have grown up to become hypervigilant, and you would have felt like, I am not really safe in an environment. I can't really trust the future. I can't necessarily trust that people are going to consistently show up for me, and that I can rely on people in the way that I need. And you'll probably find that you have big wounds around feeling helpless if you rely on others, not trusting other people to be able to show up for you consistently, or that people will want to show up for you in the long run, but also really fearing abandonment, fearing being trapped in the wrong situation, and fearing being unworthy. So as a result of this, you might feel a lot of internalized shame or find yourself constantly overcompensating in your life in order to just feel like you're worthy of love at all. Maybe you overgive all the time and underreceive, or you're scared to receive too much from other people. So I want to talk about how this conditioning affects you, and then we're going to get into the really exciting stuff. In order to understand conditioning, I think we have to understand that conditioning is literally our identity. The way that you have grown up to a very large degree and the things you learned to fear, the ways you adapted to your environment and how that shaped different parts of your personality. Like maybe, for example, you felt really powerless in your environment growing up as a fearful avoidant. So being athletic or having a sport that you play or something that you do maybe makes you feel really powerful as a result. And so you learn to love those things, right? We'll see all of our conditioning, especially in childhood, although we are in fact being conditioned all the time. Most of that conditioning comes from our childhood experiences and what we learn to need and how we learn to cope with things and what we learn to fear and basically what we came to expect out of other people. Now, research into neuroscience actually shows us that emotional triggers when we grow up, the fear of abandonment, the fear of unworthiness, the fear of being betrayed or being trapped, they actually bypass the rational brain and have the capacity when you get triggered to activate fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode at the nervous system level before you are even consciously aware that these things are occurring. So if you've ever had an experience as a fearful avoidant where you go so quickly into coping or pushing somebody away or panicking or even getting angry or frustrated, if you find yourself jumping into that triggering event so fast, before you even feel like you have control over anything you're saying or doing, that's actually why. And there's the neuroscience to back it up. And for fearful avoidance, this means these betrayal wounds, these abandonment fears, these deep feelings of shame are often automatically activated in adult relationships. And what this means is that until you learn to rewire these triggering events and painful experiences, the past is often still getting brought into your present, okay? And this is really what our relationship baggage essentially is. I want to say as well, if you want to go into our course, it's all about learning your needs so that you can individuate, know who you are as a person, know what needs you have to get met to self-soothe, learn to communicate these needs in healthy ways. It's going to help you so much if you are struggling with this. You literally can keep this course for free for life. It's actually a giveaway right now. We're just doing this for a couple of days. You can click the link below. It gives you access to all of the personal development school for free for 7 days. And with that, you will get to keep our needs course for free as a bonus. We are always being conditioned, as I mentioned briefly earlier. And what I want you to understand is that repetition and emotion fires and wires neural pathways. You've probably heard that old saying, whatever fires together, wires together. But our strongest and most prevalent and long-lasting conditioning actually comes from our early childhood experiences. And if you keep hearing me use the term conditioning and you don't know exactly what that means, I would just want to take a moment to explain it first. Because as I mentioned, all of these things are going to be really relevant and come full circle and help you completely transform the way you see your own conditioning and really your own self. Early in the 1900s, there was a Russian scientist named Ivan Pavlov who discovered that dogs could be trained to respond to a signal. So at first, this scientist essentially took dogs and placed food in front of the dogs. And we all know that animals naturally salivate when they have food in front of them. And so what Pavlov found was that when the food was in front of the dogs would naturally salivate. But then what he did is he would continuously ring a bell when the food was in front of the dogs and do it right before giving them food. After enough repetition, the dogs actually started salivating simply at the sound of the bell ringing. And what this does is it shows us how conditioning works. It shows us that our brains essentially can learn to connect a neutral signal, like a bell, with a strong response, like salivation and preparing for that dopamine hit of food. But this same principle of conditioning and how we essentially get taught to believe and feel about relationships and our environment can work in a lot of less neutral ways. For fearful avoidance, childhood conditioning works in that same sort of dynamic. The bell, quote unquote, the love, closeness, connection in a relationship often gets paired with your childhood experiences of pain, fear, abandonment, so that the body will actually often react to those things later in life in automatic ways. Like as soon as you get close to somebody, those fear responses go off. Or as soon as you start entering into a relationship with somebody, those abandonment wounds become really real. And it's because your old patterns are essentially coming back up because you've been conditioned to associate those two things together. Now, what's really interesting is that then we have this part of our brain called the limbic system, which constantly scans for threats to keep us alive from one day to another. But in human beings, the threat often comes from our conditioned mind, which is essentially that collection of fears, concepts, ideas about how people should be or what we expect from them. And really, to simplify this, I want you to think about a bear in the woods. I want you to imagine that tomorrow you go into the woods and you see a bear and you run away from the bear, and that's great. You're safe from the bear. But if you have to go back into those same woods the very next day, what does your mind do? Your mind has stored the threat of the bear from the emotional past experience, and it reprojects it back out onto everything. You 100%, if you're going into the woods, are going to walk into the woods and go, where's the bear? Oh my gosh, is the bear coming? You're going to hear a noise like the trees blowing and the bushes moving, and you're going to automatically assume that there's a bear. And we are all wired to do this. We are all wired to hang on to negative things, essentially more than positive things, so that we can protect ourselves from them. But what we often do is we end up reprojecting them back out. And this is called a negativity bias. Now, you can see this in the fact that if you are in a situation where you actually go back into the woods the next day, you don't think about the beautiful flowers you saw while you were running away from the bear. You think about the bear and its teeth. You probably didn't even notice any beautiful flowers while you were sprinting your life away from the bear. So not only do we hang on to negative things more than positive, like you'll hang on to the bear's teeth and its giant paws and claws more than you'll hang on to like the beautiful flowers in the woods yesterday when you saw the bear. But on top of that, we are wired to literally reproject all of these stored threats from the past into the present. And that is why often in relationships, you may find yourself constantly having a dysregulated nervous system because first, your own conditioning gets into a relationship with somebody now, starts feeling vulnerable or close to them. And like Pavlov's dogs ringing the bell, all of those conditioned associations come forth. So you start thinking, okay, here's a relationship. I feel vulnerable. What do I know about vulnerability? Oh, I've often felt betrayed, abandoned, trapped. And your nervous system is constantly responding to your internal conditioning. Now, this is not the exciting stuff yet. This is where it gets really interesting. You may have heard that regulating your nervous system is a huge cornerstone to healing, and it is, but it is still a reaction to your conditioning. In other words, if you didn't have all these stored threats in your subconscious mind about a bear, you wouldn't have all this conditioning firing off all the time that then has the power to dysregulate your nervous system, right? If you were walking into the woods one day, didn't get chased by a bear, and went into the woods the next day, you wouldn't necessarily have a dysregulating experience because you haven't seen any huge threats in the forest from the day before. And this means that your own subconscious mind or personality that has collected these conditioned experiences is the only reason your nervous system can get dysregulated to begin with, okay? So really the nervous system is the effect of first your subconscious conditioning. Now stay with me because here's where it gets really exciting. We have the power to change all of this through two major avenues. One avenue is through transcendence, and I'm going to talk about what that actually means in really practical terms in a moment. Another avenue is through rewiring, and it is actually about leveraging neuroplasticity to change our bears in the woods. So I want you so far to just think of your bear in the woods as being your subconscious programming. I want you to think of your bear in the woods as being the fear of abandonment when you get close to somebody, the fear of being trapped, the fear of being unworthy, the fear of being betrayed by somebody or not being able to trust your environment or the future. Okay, these are your bears in the woods, and they are stored in your subconscious mind. And so what I'm going to do is take you through two powerful ways of actually shedding this conditioning that is no longer serving you. And what I mean by this is you have the ability to get rid of these stored fears about the bear in the woods. Because when you go into the woods and are chased by a bear, you storing that as a threat actually serves you. But when it's the fact that you're now maybe in your 40s or 30s or 20s, and it's been decades since you felt abandoned as a child, and yet you're still reprojecting that fear over and over again, and it's literally acting as this baggage in your relationship that you're carrying around everywhere, and it's especially hurting you in your own daily life, well, then we want to learn how to shed and get rid of these things once and for all. And I want to share something personal here for a second first before we get into what I think is the good stuff, the really exciting stuff about how we actually change and transform these things. And it's the fact that you probably know I was a fearful avoidant attachment style. And a huge part of my own healing journey actually originated in studying ancient wisdom first and seeing these really powerful shifts and changes within myself by adopting different practices literally based in ancient wisdom. And then wondering, like, how is this actually having such a capacity to heal me? Why is this so powerful? And then diving into the neuroscience of what was taking place and shifting these things into much more practical and easy to understand concepts that can apply to pretty much everybody. I want to look at some of the links between our conditioning and how this has actually been talked about in different wisdom traditions for thousands of years. So, from a Buddhist perspective, the Buddha often talked about non attachment to concepts, and really talked about how suffering in our lives comes from clinging to ideas, clinging to these old fears, clinging to essentially our bears in the woods. And as a result of that, going into these old coping mechanisms over and over in order to try to cope with these fears arising. And in this case, you can see fearful avoidants tend to cling to the belief that, oh, if I open up, I'll be abandoned again. Or if I'm too vulnerable, I'm going to lose control and be unsafe. And so this concept from Buddhist traditions often talked about the idea of disidentification from the mind. Essentially, the idea that you are not the mind itself. You are not simply your conditioning. Instead, you are the awareness behind all of these conditions. I want to just take a really obvious example of this, okay? Let's say that you look at this pen, okay? Let's say you pick up a pen in front of you or something that's laying around you and you look at it. If you have the ability to observe something, then inherently you must be separate from it. Because who is observing that the pen is there? So you are obviously observing. You are behind the pen, able to look out onto the pen. And so you're not the pen. You can't be anything that you have the power to observe. The same principle applies to our conditioning. If you have the ability to observe that you have a wound, a fear, an old story coming up, then you are obviously not the conditioning itself. You are the witness behind it. And in a lot of powerful Buddhist teachings, one of the cornerstones of healing is that we can transcend all of our conditioning by practicing observing it rather than constantly identifying with it. And I want you to notice what happens in your life and in your mind when maybe somebody isn't texting you as much and that fear of abandonment comes up. If you could watch your mind in real time, the abandonment story or old narrative from past conditioned experiences, okay, your version of the bear in the woods that's chasing you, that old narrative arises and you invest in it. You attach to it. You go, oh my gosh, this person's leaving me. Oh my goodness, how can I know they're going to stay around? And you start storytelling around it. And your mind, rather than sitting behind that story and observing it and having the ability to not identify with it, instead clings to it. And the moment you cling to it, you are now possessed by your own conditioning, leaving you the victim of it. And Buddhism inherently teaches that evolution, growth, and healing are often sparked by practicing staying as the observer or in non-attachment to your conditioning, being able to notice it rather than feed into it. But this is simply one angle from this transcendent perspective. And we can actually cut through and heal way more quickly by diving into rewiring, which is the exercise I'm going to take you through in just a few minutes. In the Tao, there is a powerful quote that says, "Empty yourself of everything. Let the mind rest at peace. The 10,000 things rise and fall while the self watches their return. They grow and flourish and then return to the source. Returning to the source is stillness, which is our way of nature." Essentially, the 10,000 things rising and falling in this quote from the Tao is our conditioning. All of the stories that arise, all of the fears that we've experienced, all of those old wounds being reprojected again, back out, just like the bear in the woods. But returning to the source is meaning resting in consciousness, the consciousness that you are behind all of your conditioning, the part of you that can observe all of these things taking shape. Just like I showed you a moment ago with the pen. If you can see the pen, you are not the pen. If you can see all of the stories coming from your old conditioning, you are not those stories. You are not the conditioning. And this is really that concept of transcendence, transcending your conditioning. And again, we're going to move to an exercise shortly that then goes into rewiring, because this is where we can really speed things up. But I just want to share with you one last really exciting reference, or beautiful reference I found. And this is actually from the Forgotten Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus said, "I stood in the middle of the world and appeared to them in the flesh. I found them all drunk. I didn't find any of them thirsty. My soul ached for the children of humanity because they were blind in their hearts and couldn't see. Meanwhile, they're drunk. When they shake off their wine, they'll then be able to change." And here I really believe this concept of being drunk is actually referencing being intoxicated by the mind, being intoxicated by conditioning. And when we are so intoxicated and caught up in our fears, our wounds, our stories, we become blind in the heart, unable to see things clearly. In other words, people are not in their right mind when conditioning is active. And you've probably all seen this in your own experiences, where perhaps you got angry and you were afraid that you were about to be hurt, and that led to this anger. Maybe you were afraid of being abandoned or betrayed, and so you said all these things you didn't mean, and then time passed and you came back to yourself later as you sort of sobered up out of that anger and came back to yourself. You're like, oh my gosh, why did I act out of character? Why did I say those things I don't mean? And really, for fearful avoidance, being drunk of the mind looks like reacting to those old triggers from childhood, that childhood conditioned pain, instead of being able to be present in the experience. And as a result of that, you divorce yourself from the ability to stay in connection the more the mind takes you for a ride and essentially reprojects the bear in the woods, reprojects your own conditioning back out onto the world. And sometimes this happens even when you have a safe partner. Sometimes this happens even when you have somebody really healthy. You're still projecting your past fears or wounds from childhood out onto the present event. The very last thing before we get into your rewiring work, which is really how to change and cut through this conditioning beyond just the ability to transcend and observe this conditioning arising and practice that work of non-attachment, is there's a beautiful poem from somebody named Rumi. If you're not familiar, he's a 13th century Sufi mystic. And the poem says, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and rightdoing, there is a field, and I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even phrases like each other don't make any sense." And what Rumi is referencing here in this beautiful poem is this idea that out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and rightdoing, out beyond all of our conditioning of concepts of right, wrong, good, bad, there is a field. And the field itself is everything behind it, all that you are and are connected to behind all of your conditioning, behind all of these fears, all of these concepts, all of these ideas of separation, and this person's wrong and this person's right, and this idea is wrong and this idea is right. And I personally believe that the more we work through our conditioning, the more that we start to free ourselves from all of these concepts and begin to unlearn them or rewire what is no longer serving us. This is where we tend to experience the most profound healing and inner freedom. So remember, I said there were two ways to heal. There is the transcendent perspective, which is what we've just been referencing, and the other is the rewiring. So in my own inner healing journey, I found the transcendent practices were really helpful for having this idea that like we are so much more than just our conditioning. And this idea of practicing not attaching to those old stories and being able to observe these things, observe our emotions rather than attach to them, observe these thoughts and stories and narratives. This is really powerful from a nervous system perspective, a somatic healing perspective. But also, I often found how quickly my own bear in the woods would come back. In other words, how much I had all of these stored emotions and experiences from my past conditioning. And while I could understand conceptually this transcendent idea of sitting in behind these stories and watching the triggers come up and not attaching with them, that was often much easier said than done. And this is where, as a person, I started to look more deeply into how these conditioned wounds, these fears, Are the things dysregulating our nervous system? In other words, you can't always just tackle things from this nervous system and transcendent point of view, because otherwise you're going to find yourself always having to regulate your nervous system again when the bear in the woods comes back, right? When that old story of abandonment, that old story of being trapped reemerges. So I started to really dive more deeply into the neuroscience of how we recondition the mind. And what I knew at the beginning is that we are not born with all these conditioned ideas. They get conditioned into us over time. And so we had to be able to recondition them, or essentially equilibrate out these old concepts. And here is one of the many forms or exercises that I put together out after a lot of research into how to rewire what is not serving us, how to get that fear of abandonment out of our subconscious mind, out of these ongoing reprojections into our external environment. And here's a very practical tool. So this tool is called belief reprogramming. And this is how you can actually rewire these painful concepts that keep popping up on that mental screen of your life and dictating or influencing your behaviors. Those times that you yell or retreat or raise your voice or get frustrated or sad or push somebody away or lean into somebody too much and become anxious or text too often. This is how we can actually change these things at their core. So here's the actual exercise, okay? I want you in step 1 of this exercise, it's 3 steps, to start by just writing down what your version essentially is of the bear in the woods. Is it this fear that like, I'm going to be trapped in every relationship, or I'm going to get into a relationship and open my heart, but eventually everybody will leave? Or I'm going to end up, committing to somebody and opening myself, and then they're going to betray me and it's going to really hurt. I can't trust that people will not hurt me long term. I want you to get really clear on like what your bear in the woods is. Okay. And that is step 1. Step 2 is we're then going to find the opposite of it. Okay. So if it's I will be betrayed, you might say I will have loyalty. I will be abandoned. I will have connection. I am unworthy. I am worthy. So I want you to think of the opposite idea. And the idea of rewiring isn't that we wire in a new idea. It's that we equilibrate out an old one. We bring balance into our subconscious conditioning so that we are not polarized in our view. We don't think I'm only ever going to be seen as unworthy. I'm only ever going to be abandoned. We're able to see, no. It's also possible for people to stay. And as we recondition this, and this is not the reconditioning part yet, okay, I'll tell you about how this actually works from a neuroscience perspective in a moment. But as we actually start wiring in the opposite idea, you'll see that we get into a space of equilibrium, okay, where we're not just so one-sidedly believing that we're not good enough, we're unworthy, we're unlovable, all these painful bears in the woods. Step 3 is we are then going to come up with 10 pieces of evidence why this new idea is possible, why it's possibly true. So let's just use a really easy example of I am unlovable, I am lovable. Okay, it's possible that I am lovable. We need 10 to 15 pieces of evidence why it's possible for us to be lovable. Here's why we need evidence, okay? And this is one of the most important things ever if you're going to actually try to recondition your own subconscious mind. And it is the fact that your subconscious mind, which is the warehouse, the storage of all of your conditioned experiences, okay? It's the one holding on to all of your conditioning this entire time. It does not speak language. It does not hear the word not. It does not hear like actual physical language. And you know this because if I say whatever you do right now, whatever you do not think of a chocolate chip cookie. You probably thought of a chocolate chip cookie because your conscious mind hears do not, but your subconscious mind actually speaks in emotions and imagery. Now, I want you to note that your conscious mind is not the one choosing to tell all of these old stories. It's not the one projecting the bear in the woods. If you actually think about it, your conscious mind is never sitting there going, oh, I'm going to tell myself all day today that I'm not good enough, that I'm unlovable, and see how I feel. Let's see what happens. You're not consciously choosing. And your conscious mind is the seat of choice, analysis, logic. Your subconscious mind is like a tape recorder that's going to just replay the same old programs. And so if we want to speak to changing our conditioning, we have to engage only the subconscious mind in the process because that's literally where the problem is. And that precisely is why things like affirmations don't work, because affirmations are you using language to try to change your own internal conditioning. That's not going to make any sense. You using language and saying all day long, I'm good enough, I'm good enough, I'm good enough. That's not even speaking to the subconscious mind, which is where the house of the problem exists. So we have it so far. Conscious mind, not the problem. Subconscious mind is the problem. The subconscious mind speaks in emotions and imagery. And when we actually pick up evidence from past experiences, it's actually a a tool or a trick that elicits out emotions and imagery. Now let's take a look. If you were to think of your favorite childhood memory, what happens? You might say, oh, it was me playing on the playground with my friends. Well, what's actually taking place is that in that moment, you see the images of the slide, of the playground, of you playing with your friends, of your friends' faces. And we've all seen people when they recount old memories, they laugh or they smile or their body language changes. And that's because memories are also the container of emotions. Okay, so memories or old evidence, same thing, contain emotion and imagery. Emotion and imagery is the language of your subconscious mind. So now to summarize your three major steps, if we just simplify them. Step one, find your old bear in the woods. And it's opposite. I'll be betrayed. I'll have loyalty. I'm unlovable. I'm lovable. I'm not good enough. I'm good enough. Okay, step one. Step two, we need 10 pieces of memory or evidence to support the new idea, because now we're actually engaging our subconscious mind in the process. And so this could be, for example, that you're like, okay, 10 ways that I know I'm lovable. And maybe you look at characteristics that you have, who you truly are when nobody's watching. I'm somebody who is very caring. I'm somebody who is deeply empathetic. Maybe you look at people who love you. Oh, I know that my family member loves me because late at night when I had to go through a hard emergency, they showed up and they were there, so you have to think of really specific. The more specific you get in your proof or evidence, the more emotion it elicits and the more it engages the subconscious mind as a result. So you might come up with 10 times you felt really loved instead of unloved, or 10 characteristics or traits about you that you know inherently are lovable. Then what we do in step three, we actually need to record it down, like into our phone, record ourselves reading it out loud, and listen back for 21 days, because research into neuroscience shows that it takes about 21 days to strongly embed new neural networks that are much less likely to atrophy over time, because your neural pathways atrophy like muscles. If you don't work out your bicep muscle, it fades away. And so neural pathways actually build through repetition and emotion. So if we can listen back, feel about it, see the images of these old memories for 21 days, you're ingraining in new ideas. And this will return you to balanced programming, that instead of believing you're unlovable, you're like, actually, no, it's possible to be lovable. There are people who love me. And we get out of the old conditioning and we come into relationship into a place of balance, into a place of removing the conditioning or unlearning the conditioning that actually caused us a lot of pain and suffering to begin with. Now, for those of you who do believe in God or are interested in spirituality in any form, there's this old beautiful song by somebody named Trevor Hall, and the song is called Bowl of Light. In this song, Trevor Hall says over and over again, sort of in the chorus of the song, don't you put your stones in that bowl of light. And this idea is that we have this bowl of light and the light shines through the bowl and shines through the bowl. But as we go through painful events or experiences throughout the course of our life, they're like stones and we put them in the bowl and we put them in the bowl. And the more the bowl fills up or begins filling up with stones, the more it's blocking that light from shining through. The stones in this analogy, in my opinion, are our conditioning. All of the wounds we've collected. Oh, I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. I'm unlovable. Everybody's going to betray me. And every time we hold on to a stone, we block our own inner light or connection to our own divinity. As a result of that, we experience more pain, we experience more suffering, and we experience a darker way of living through our lives. But when we can start taking the stones out and letting them go and dropping them away by reconditioning them, by evening them out from this neuroscience point of view, it then puts us back into connection with our own individual and unique light and connection to potentially our higher power, whatever that may look like to any of you. And as a result of that, we don't only heal, but we live from a much higher expression of ourselves. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to this channel. I put daily content out here, and I look forward to seeing you in future videos.